If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this. People, regardless of your opinion of the occult, what is the most downright creepy, unexplainable thing you've experienced? I live in the north of Switzerland. We have a lot of old military bunkers from the Second World War. When I was 7 or 8 years old, 3 friends of mine and I went out to explore one of these bunkers who was built on a hill inside a small forest. The main door was jammed, so we had to break it up. We found a big log nearby and used it as a battering ram. After many tries the door won't budge. But there was a peephole. It was about 10 centimeters, 4 inch, in diameter. We opened it and illuminated the dark inside. There was a long, ruined and dark hallway with rooms on the left and right side. We couldn't see the end of the hallway. It was just too long. Every one of us wanted to catch a glimpse of the inside, when one of my friends says, "There is a small light at the end of the hallway." This light was not there when I watched Trough the peephole. So I pushed him away and took a second look. What I saw gave me a shiver. There was not a small light, it looked more like a flashlight pointed directly towards me, and behind it was a silhouette of a person. I walked a few steps back and said, "There is someone in there." At the same moment someone, or something, knocked on the door from the inside of the bunker. This was the moment we got into panic, start screaming and run away. I was so scared I run straight home and locked the door. On the next day in school, my friends and I talked about the event. We came to the explanation that probably some older kids have played a prank on us. 1 week later we went to the same bunker again. But as we saw, the welded connection, that should keep the door locked, were rusty and not broken, we just left without saying a word to each other. It was impossible someone opened this door before us, and this was the only entrance. I still live in the same region. But since then I have never visited the bunker again. I'm walking home from a friend who lives on a country road a few kilometers out of my hometown in March 2001. Another friend is with me. As we walk we both notice an orange light in a field a few hundred meters to our left. We both glanced at it but both ignored it, putting it off as a tractor or farm vehicle of some sort. We keep walking when we both get a strong whiff of ozone. Both of us turned and looked at the field, just in time to see what we can now appreciate to be an orange ball of light a few meters round rise and then ducking rocket into the air, soundlessly. We both stood still for a few seconds, then bolted like hell down the road, sprinting until we both nearly collapsed. We ran most of the way back to his place, and told his parents what we'd seen. They pretty much laughed at us, and his dad suggested if we had seen anything at all, which he doubted, then it was probably just ball lightning. No one else really believed us either, and there weren't any sightings reported in our local paper. But yeah, that's the most weird thing that ever happened to me. My mother-in-law was a very funny and cool woman. She and my wife were really close and sadly, she passed away when our son was about 4 months old. Flash forward a few years. We live in an old 1930s era craftsman house in Pasadena, California. Our son is about 3. I was giving him a bath one night and he starts looking over my shoulder, not at random stuff, but at something. A moment passes and he asks me why Grandma calls Mommy a funny name. Long pause. I asked him what he meant, thinking he was talking about my mom. He then says, "Why does Grandma call Mommy Witch, my mother-in-law's nickname for my wife?" I was really set back by this. My wife and I never used the nickname, it was just what her mom called her since she was a baby. I asked him where he heard that. His reply: "The farmer told me." I asked him who the farmer was and he replied, "His friend." I tell my wife this story later and she's of course reduced to tears over the whole nickname thing. We both know there is no way for him to know this and we just kinda marvel at it. Flash forward to the next weekend and my son is playing in his room. My wife is at work, retail, and I'm home. I hear him start talking like he's having a conversation. He's saying things like yes, no, I don't know, that, then some laughing. I go into his room and ask him what Hess doing and he says playing. I ask with who? He says the farmer. At this point I'm already thinking about the Ducking Exorcist movie and Captain Howdy. It's a little unsettling. I ask him where the farmer is. He says he left when I came in. The duck. So my wife gets home and I tell her this and now she's just as weirded out as I am. We have no idea what do and figure if it happens again we'll do something. A few days later in the middle of the night we both overhear our son saying the following: "Grandma says you and I can't be friends anymore." Wife and I go check on him, both of us a little freaked. He's just sitting up in bed. I ask if he's okay and he says yay, Grandma says I can't play with the farmer anymore. He never once mentioned the farmer again. Not ever. He's 13 now and doesn't remember any of it. We do though. I have 2 stories. When my son was about 6 months old, I had a dream that I was at my grandparents' house with him. My grandfather was holding my son and crying while I talked to my grandmother. I told her that I wished her and my grandfather were still alive to see my son, and she said, "Don't worry, we see him." I didn't think anything else of it until about 5 years later I was talking to my sister and I mentioned that I'd had a dream about our grandparents. She said, "Was Papa Joe, what we called our grandfather, holding your son while he rocked in his chair, and did Grandma tell you they were watching you?" I said yes and asked how she knew, and she said I had the same dream when my son was 6 months old. And more recently. My son, he was 20 at the time, was driving home from work late one night. As he drove, he said he very clearly heard my mother, who had been dead for 2 years, say, "Jonathan, stop the car." Out of reflex he did, and as soon as he stopped, 3 deer ran out in front of him. Had he not stopped the car, he'd have hit them. When I was in high school, a group of friends and I did an archaeological dig of a Roman fort in South Shields, UK. I had never been out of the US, so we took the train up to Edinburgh for some sightseeing. We really enjoyed ourselves, until the evening when we went out for drinks. As we were walking back to our hotel, a group of 2 women, and 1 man approached our group. For whatever reason, I was overcome with anxiety. As they got closer, I saw that they were 3 of the most beautiful and arrogant looking people I'd ever seen. Bright blue eyes, perfect hair, perfectly fitted, all black clothing. Everyone as my group noticed, they seemed, for lack of a better term, powerful. What happened next blew my mind. They came up to us, and inquired as to what we were doing, etc. We sort of half lied, and stood there awkwardly. Someone mentioned that we were heading to London the following day. One of the women looked at us and said that we must avoid the tube and buses, and that it would be best to get out of the country ASAP. By that point we were all extremely creeped out, but made it to our hotel. The following morning we took an early flight back to London, and took a cab to our hotel. That was the day of the London tube bombings. 6 years later I'm visiting my girlfriend who was getting her MS at the University of Edinburgh. We're at some pub, and I see the woman and man who talked to me half a decade ago. She approached me and said that I was right to have taken her advice. I look completely different now. It was the single most spine-chilling event of my life, and I don't think I'll ever forget it. I live outside of Huntsville, Texas. There's a road they call Demon Road that runs parallel to another road. In between is an old cemetery and a dirt road connecting the 2 roads. Rumor has it that on Demon Road a few years ago, there was a car accident and a police shootout that left 2 people dead. The car was never taken from the spot it crashed and the angry spirits never left. About 4 years ago, I went down there with some friends to investigate. We parked on the dirt road and a truck pulled in from the other side, KC daylighters on, blinding me. A woman got out. I thought I was going to die. Technically we were trespassing. She walked to my window and said, "You be careful." She got back in her truck and drove off. I got out, rubbed some dirt on my car in an attempt to reveal fingerprints, and headed down Demon Road. About 1/4 mile down the road, I felt a cold punch on my chest and froze in my tracks. I tried to walk forward and again felt a press on my chest. I turned back to my car with a friend while everyone else continued to the car. I decided something was telling me it was a bad idea to continue. About 30 minutes later, the group came back and we started comparing pictures, audio, and EMF readings. We caught some quality pictures and EMF readings, but no audio. One of the girls asked the guy next to her, "Why did you pull my hair?" He said he didn't, and about 10 seconds later, she screamed, "Something jerked my ponytail," and we scrambled back to our cars and sped back to the city. When we got back to civilization, I got out and saw handprints and finger drawings all over my car. The most compelling were the 2 smeared handprints on my trunk, like someone was hanging on, lost grip, and slid down the trunk. The Roman numeral 12 was also fingered into the dust. I don't try to make sense of what happened that night, but that will always be burned into my mind as the absolute scariest encounter of my life. I grew up in rural Arkansas. I also grew up during a time when lots of family farms were caving into the pressure of big agricultural industries and selling off loads of farmland and forest acreage to massive companies that wanted to develop our little area into a mega feedlot, which has largely happened. When I was in 9th or 10th grade, that new, clear-cut style of ag development finally made its way to within a couple of miles of our house. And it was awful. We didn't have any close neighbors, and we were the only house on our route for probably 10 miles in either direction. So it felt very violating to have this development slowly work its way up our road to our house over the course of a couple of years. But, once spring arrived, those new clear-cut expanses exploded into fields of tall grasses and brambles, and fireflies loved them. Our place is along one of several bayous that converge into a wide, mossy wetland, so mid-spring nights are full of light fog that hugs the ground as it rolls away from the wet ground and out into the surrounding forest, and the clear-cut fields that replaced it. Driving home with my friend Patrick one night, we come to a screeching halt on the road as it passes by the border of this new foggy, endless grass field. I have never seen so many fireflies in a single congregation in my life. There must have been millions. And it was truly gorgeous. They would sync up in small groups flashing in unison, then those harmonies would break up, then come back together again, then break up, and on and on. We watched from the hood of the car for a while and eventually decided we had to go walk out into the field to see the light show from the inside. It was an amazing experience walking through them, and we walked for probably a good 2 kilometers to about the midpoint of this particular clearcut. Grasses were damp and about mid-chest tall, and the fog was only about the same height, rolling in from the east, direction of the bayou, and still thin enough to see through. We freeze for a moment when we see the grass tops swaying a bit up ahead, but calm down when we realize it looks like a raccoon or armadillo or something is walking around and we're just seeing its rustling. Quickly, though, we can see the top of the animal doing it, the flat back peeking through the grass tops now and again. What is that? A huge dog? Surely not. What dog is 4.5 feet tall? And it hasn't got its head popped up over the grasses looking where it's going. Still, it's possible? Or maybe a deer, head down and grazing? It's too far away to really tell, maybe 100 yards from us, and there's just not enough available moonlight to see details. At this point we get a little nervous about startling an animal, so we move closer together and I clear my throat to make some audible, non-threatening noise. The motion comes to a total stop again, no head pops up to see what the noise was. Which we find totally freaky and uncomfortable. I feel Pat touch my back, like a quiet nudge, and I take it to mean we should quietly go back to the car. As soon as we start moving a bit, the dog or whatever stands up, and it is clearly human-sized and with head full of long hair. Don't see any clothes. Don't see anything other than it is now moving toward us, quickly, at a good pace. Needless to say, we are now running. We run for the 15 or so minutes it takes us to get back to the roadside without making a peep or turning around, because we are both scared as duck. Jump in the car, slap the locks closed, and then we're looking back into the field, but nothing's visible. We ride back home, breathlessly tell my mom, and basically talk ourselves over it again and again for weeks. I have no paranormal inclinations, but what would a naked, long-haired person be doing rummaging around on all fours in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas, where there is precisely one road and one house for about a 15-mile radius? Was it some crazy person who was living in the wilderness? That thought scares me more since we spent so much time in tents and deer stands out there over the years. At the time it just made me think about Pet Cemetery. I still freak out about going by that place at night when I visit my parents. Many years ago, as a 14-year-old, staying overnight at a friend's house, with 3 other friends, similar ages. We'd all grown up together, except one, who was a cousin of the kid who lived there, and we'd never met him before. His older sister, 16 at the time, was the babysitter while the parents were out for the evening. She decides to unearth a Ouija board from a cupboard somewhere, and thinks it'll be a laugh to scare us shitless. This was back in the days, when you could buy Ouija boards as a board game from your local toy store. So we all gather round, and she starts off with a kind of yes/no lie detector, directing questions to each of us in turn. Cue nervous giggles, but also a feeling of unease, as we all began to feel like this was awesomely amazing, like some kind of secret that we'd all been unaware of before. Shit gets strange, when the sister asks out loud, that if anybody is here, please show yourself. A pause of a few seconds, and then a framed picture falls off the wall, and onto the floor. Naturally, we all freak the duck out. She calms us all down, and insists we go back to the board, because we have to help whoever knocked the picture down. Ashen-faced, and hearts pounding, we start asking questions, and I should also add, the pointer is moving smoothly and rapidly, in a completely different manner than before. Are you in the room? Pointer says yes. Are you a man? Pointer says no. Do you need help? Pointer says no. What's your name? Pointer spells out SARAH. Tell us a secret, we ask. Pointer spells out flip a coin. So we did. Someone leaves the table and gets a 10p piece from out of the loose change jar in the kitchen. This was in the days when 10p coins were big and chunky. The coin goes spinning high up into the air. As we watch it coming down, it stops spinning and serenely falls edge down to land on the table. When I say land, it didn't bounce, it didn't rock, it just came down and met the table, perfectly balanced on its edge, as if someone had reached out and gently placed it there. Breaking the silence, the pointer starts moving again. Seemingly random letters, we soon realize their initials, including middle names. Family tradition for my friend and his sister was to have 3 middle names, something not all of us knew. Aside from the brother and the cousin, no one else would have known the older sister's full name, and we'd met the cousin for the first time that night. Somehow, every person present had their initials correctly spelled out to them. Pointer pauses, and then spells out 3 last words. Children. Stop. Now. Took me many weeks to be able to sleep properly. No one told their parents, and over the years it became our collective shared secret. Couldn't rationalize it then, still can't rationalize it today. Freaky as duck. I'm super skeptical, but my friend does all kinds of ghost hunt things. I go along with him sometimes because it's very different and always a silly experience. Except once, when we were going over the evidence. I do a lot of his sound work, and I was with him this particular time, so we're going through the audio and he hears something that sounds like a piano playing. I stick it into Goldwave and clean it up immensely. It fades in slowly, and fades out slowly, it's clear as day. There was no piano in the house, no power in the house, no access to radio, this was in the middle of nowhere, and the closest neighbor was approx 1 mile away. We also didn't hear it during the time it was playing, so only the equipment picked it up. Goddamn, it gave me chills with zero explanation. There were several other unexplainable pictures/noises that we picked up, but nothing to that magnitude. My grandmother had a giant window in her family room that looked out on the backyard. It was a good-sized yard that backed up to fields and wooded area. The deer would make daily trips to her yard to hit the provided salt lick and steal pears off the trees. My grandmother would sit in her chair and watch the deer, and it would be uncommon to visit her and not see several deer walking through the yard. So grandmother got very old, like grandmothers do, and developed a cancer that couldn't be treated. She went from her chair to lying on the couch, still able to enjoy the deer outside. Eventually the decision was made to move her to hospice. My father, uncle and sister were there that day. I lived several states away, though I had traveled to say my goodbye not long before. It was obviously a very emotional process to take someone from their home of 60 years, for the last time. As they were doing a final trip through the house, why can't I stop crying? They went through the family room and saw 15 to 20 deer in the backyard. The deer were all sitting, and all looking at the house. Normally they just wander around for a few minutes and move on. But they were all sitting there, and stayed that way while my family stared back. My father, uncle, and sister all swear by the story. Maybe it was a weird weather day, or the deer had a meetup scheduled that day anyway, but I like to think that they came to say goodbye to a longtime friend. I was sleeping peacefully one night when I awakened to my husband in the room. He's randomly wearing a red hat and just standing close to the door. I lift my head and say, "What are you doing?" Then fall back asleep because I was so tired. He never answered me. I kind of awakened slightly again a minute or two later and he isn't there anymore. So now I'm struggling with just going back to sleep or getting up, cause I'm curious to know if he needed to ask me something. So a couple minutes later I muster the energy to get up. I find him in the garage and ask him why he was staring at me in my sleep. He has no idea what I'm talking about. I tell him about the hat, but he doesn't own one. He also says he's been in the garage for hours. I was completely creeped out and have no idea how I went back to my room that night. In the morning I realized that I was probably sleeping and just imagined the whole thing, but a small part of me still fears the man in the red hat. I lived in some really unsettling places. One of the events that stuck with me the most is probably this. I woke up one morning and as usual I walked to the mirror to brush the teeth and fix the hair. Now, I'm in a relatively small place with a balcony and sink in the same room without openable windows. I looked in the mirror and I see one of my plants moving, like there's wind blowing against it. I turn around and walk over to the plant, that is next to the door, and check if the balcony door is closed. It was. For some reason, while walking back to the mirror my eye fell on one of the pens lying on my desk. When I arrive at the mirror the first thing I notice are all these pen markings on my face. My heart stops and there's goosebumps everywhere. I cleaned up and fled the room. When I came back the door to the balcony was open. Needless to say, I didn't enjoy being there for quite some while after. I'm gonna preface this by saying I went to boarding school for 6 years. This boarding school was in the middle of a one-stoplight town and on a hill 800 feet up. The school used to be an old monastery. It was hundreds of years old and huge. 4 stories including a basement where there was a boiler room and long hallways. Not all of these stories happened to myself, but the people who told me them were reliable enough to believe. Also, the school didn't want us telling stories to other people because they were afraid that it would make them not want to go to the school due to it being haunted. The first one happened to me. I used to be in charge of cleaning the gymnasium at night. Every student had a job that they had to do either at night or in the morning to help take care of the school. Taught you some practical things and all. Anywho, I was there by myself that night getting ready to start sweeping the gym. The gym had 2 floors to it. The upstairs part was the weightlifting area, and you could see it fully from the bottom part of the gym where the basketball court was. As I stepped into the gym, one of the basketballs starts rolling a bit. I look around to see if any doors are open, none are. I chalk it up to randomness, but see that it is continuing to roll. As I watch it, it makes a full circle around the entire gym and stops right next to my feet. At this point, I'm a bit scared, but figured it was nothing. I heard a creaking coming from the 2nd floor and look up. There is a girl there, just staring right at me. As soon as I made direct eye contact with her, she bolts to the stairs that would take her to me. She let out a scream that I cannot describe. I was terrified and froze in place. Thankfully, she didn't come to me, but took a left and bolted through the main doors of the gym. They didn't open, she just went right through them. I noped the hell out of there. It was 2nd year at university and I was living in this creepy-ass townhouse. It overlooked a giant ravine filled with trees, had a very unsettling feeling when you looked out our huge living room windows. Also, our living room was the 2nd floor and our basement had a walkout to said ravine. So while living at this place I experienced lots of weird shit, but this one rises well above the rest. So one night I was watching television in our living room. The TV was set up so that it was in front of the living room windows. Keep in mind, we didn't have any window curtains cause we were broke as poor students. So the whole time you had this eerie ravine in the background at all times. I was cooking pasta and it fogged up our windows completely. It was 20 degrees outside Canadian winter. As I'm coming back from the kitchen I sit down and continue watching television. Halfway through my pasta my eyes look at the windows since something caught my eye. I literally drop my fork and my mouth is gaping wide open. There is a fresh handprint that has been streaked across the window from inside of the house with moisture dripping down. I walk closer since I'm skeptical and my fears are realized. Someone or something just put its hand across the window. At the moment a sheer feeling of terror was all around me. Nope. I ran the duck out of there in my shorts and t-shirt in the freezing cold to my friend's house. I'd like to begin saying that there have been many happenings in this house, but I'll share the most frightening. Backstory: the area where my house is was once open prairie and we have found Native American artifacts laying around the area. When my parents divorced when I was a young teenager, my mother and I moved into this house. Now, at first it seemed great. There was plenty of space and it had a very cozy feel to it. However, as time went on strange things began to happen. The more I noticed them the more frequent they would become. I'd hear someone walking downstairs as I was brushing my teeth and would assume it was my mom, but whenever I'd check no one would be there. Footsteps began to be a very common sound in my house, especially at night. So, after some time I came to the realization that, oh shit, my house is haunted. Now here is where things got really weird. One day my good friend and I had just gotten done from being out in the sun and decided to retreat to my mom's house. Considering she had been away on a business trip we figured this would be awesome. My friend and I could go drink or do whatever mischievous activities we wanted to. We were wrong. We walked inside and headed straight for the basement where it was cooler than the rest of the house. While walking down the stairs I noticed that the Beatles' Yellow Submarine poster hanging at the bottom of the stairwell was tilted slightly to the left. No bother, I figured, it must have gotten bumped by me or something. I fixed it and we walked into the main room. Mind you, we had pictures and posters hanging everywhere in the basement. What my friend and I saw instantly creeped us out. All 10 to 15 pictures on the walls were each tilted slightly to the left. Just as the Beatles one had been. But the weirdness of the situation didn't stop there. The storage room, essentially a dirt-floored room that is lifted about 4 feet off the ground, had its door cracked open. So I walk over and see a golden glow emanating out. There is a pull cord light located about 10 feet from the door that is turned on. So I hop up and into the storage room, crawl on my hands and knees to the light, and turn it off. Hoping that all of this had a natural explanation I call my mom up and ask her about it. She says she has no idea what I'm talking about and hasn't been in the basement for weeks before she left on her trip. Shivers shoot down my spine. I look back into the storage room, and in the dirt there's a footprint. The most distorted and mangled footprint imaginable. I'm frozen in fear. My friend is too. Without words we look at one another, each feeling a sickening, gut-wrenching feeling. I slammed the storage space door shut, locked it, and we bolted out of my house as fast as we could. I'll never forget how sickening and mangled that footprint looked, and thinking that I had crawled in there to turn off the light still gives me shivers to this day. My wife and I used to live in this kinda run-down duplex. Through the front door was the living room connected to the kitchen with a hallway that went to the rest of the rooms in the place. One night I was walking back to our bedroom and looked up to see a man with a faint blue glow wearing one of the old-time railroad outfits. I could see him in my peripheral, but when I went to focus on him he was gone. Now this really unsettled me because my grandfather had died not too long prior and he used to work for Frisco. So I moped back into the living room thinking that I was just upset with having lost him and my imagination was playing tricks on me. Well, in walks my wife from our room down the hallway and she's a shade paler than usual. I ask her if she's alright and she just kind of shakes her head. This is going to sound crazy, but I just saw a guy glowing blue wearing this weird uniform kind of like what you see in movies for guys that used to work on railroads. My jaw kind of hit the floor. Neither of us were really freaked even though we were a little startled, but my grandfather passed away before I was with my wife and I never told her what he did for a living. So I have a lot of stories, like the man in black everyone used to see at the coffee shop where I used to work, or when I got plates dropped on my head in my kitchen, or the woman who was only feet. But I'll just tell two more recent stories. First one was when I was walking to work, I was talking on the phone to my friend using those iPhone headphones with the microphone. We're talking, and then all of a sudden, there is a clattering sound, like she had dropped her phone. I actually thought she had. So I'm expecting her to apologize for dropping the phone, but instead, there's this really deep guttural laugh. Then there are howls and squeals and what sounds like a car crashing, tires squealing, then a man yelling burn, burn, burn. I freaked out, and hung up. I called her back, and she was angry for me not responding to her. Apparently for about a minute, she had been hearing me, but I was hearing this awful sound. My other creepy experience was a few years ago, and I lived in this basement apartment. My roommates were in the living room, and I was sitting on the floor of my roommate's room, working on something. I heard movement in the doorway behind me, and thinking it was my roommate, I just said hi, and kept working. She stepped up beside me, I thought, and ran her fingers through my hair. I asked her something, and when she didn't answer, I leaned off her leg, which I had been leaning on, and turned to look at her. Only she wasn't there. Weirded out, I went into the living room to ask my roommates if either of them had been in the other room, and they gave me a weird look, and said they'd been there watching TV and eating the whole time. Never got an explanation for who had been there. My dad died, very unexpectedly, in 2007 at about 1:30 a.m. We left the hospital, went home, slept, and got up the next morning to make funeral arrangements. I was 20, we were all shell-shocked and just trying to get through it. Coworkers brought his things from his office, including a digital picture frame, but they'd forgotten the cord. My mom really wanted it at the service, so I went to Best Buy to find an adapter or something. I went to the checkout lanes with the cord and I'm sure I looked like a ghost, just totally running on fumes and not all there. I remember the cashiers were two women, one in her 20s who was training one in her teens. She kept prompting her to ask stuff, did I need warranty, etc., and the trainee asked me if I wanted to use my rewards card. I said sure. Scanned the card, I'm still looking off in space when she asked, are you, my dad's name? Because it was the one on the account. Being a girl, I clearly didn't have a dude's name, so the trainee and the cashier laughed a little. I immediately burst into tears at the sound of my dad's name. I just started to lose it. I felt so bad for this poor trainee, but I couldn't get a grip. Now for the unexplainable. Best Buy has the overhead music system, and it was playing some crappy song. The very second after I started crying, the song stopped. Just stopped dead, no overhead music, just silence. Then it started playing a song by my favorite band. Not from the beginning, like in the middle at the chorus. The week before he died, I had just introduced my dad to this band. He had loved them and wanted more, but he got sick and we never had a chance. It was the only thing that made me stop crying and get out of there. I felt like he reached out and comforted me. I know there are probably a lot of real explanations for what happened, but just the way it felt at the time was so unexplainable to me. That was 5 years ago and I've not felt any otherworldly connection to my dad since. My house is definitely haunted. Actually, I don't know if it's a haunting, or if my son managed to bring in a poltergeist. They say emotionally disturbed children attract them, so that could be it too. Anyway, my house was built in 1889. It's inevitable that someone would have died here. There are two that we know of for sure. One was a child, and he died of an illness. It was listed as natural causes in 1944. The other was an older gentleman, he died of undetermined causes in 1979. Both in the house. The boy died in my bedroom, the older man died in the area that was once the enclosed front porch and is now my daughter's room. The little boy is mean, not evil, but mean. I have pictures of him, in silhouette, standing in my bedroom. I will dig them out and scan them if I can find them. The only thing he's ever done that was potentially harmful was push a dresser down the stairs. The dresser was sitting at least a foot back from the top of the stairs, on solid ground, was not leaning at all. All of a sudden, when my roommate was about 3/4 of the way down the stairway, it comes flying down the stairs. He threw himself out of the way, and the dresser hit the bottom of the stairs so hard that it literally exploded. Creepy shit. The old man doesn't do much, just hangs around in our entryway. He covers my daughter up when she's cold and she claims to have talked to him, but I have never actually seen him myself. When we moved in, there was a satchel full of dried red peppers hanging in the entryway. I took it down and threw it away. It was put back up. This went on for literally months before I asked him to please stop putting them back up, because they had a potpourri smell to them and it was making my roommate really sick. He let me throw them away for good after that. Not that creepy. There's a female here too, but I know nothing about her, and no death of a female was disclosed to us when we bought the house. The guys hear her more than I do. My husband has heard her come on to him when he was the only one in our bedroom, multiple times. I've only heard her once. Clear as day, in a room that should have only had my husband and I in it, a female said, "Who is this witch? I thought you wanted to be my daddy." That freaked me right the duck out. I blessed the house, with holy water, even though I am not religious. In fact, I'm leaning towards a belief in no God, but I was ducking scared. No one slept that night. We heard a woman crying, pounding on the side door, which we use as the front door, begging us to let her in. That door has a peephole, and it was winter, so we could have either seen anyone that was really out there, or seen tracks leading to the porch by looking out our window. There was neither. By dawn the screaming had faded out to crying, and by 8 a.m. it was completely gone. My husband and roommate think that whatever it was is gone. I think it was a ruse and she is still here. Just a gut feeling. There's more, but this already turning into a text wall. I'd love to have one of those ghost hunting shows in here. When I was a student, the campus was located on what had only 20 years before been an old asylum for the insane. Like, batshit crazy people. They did lobotomies there and whatnot. Most of the buildings had been refurbished into normal school buildings with lecture halls, study group rooms, etc. Seemed pretty normal, except the small study group rooms that only had one window, that was 1 square feet, 15 feet up on the wall, with bars in front of it. Yeah. Now, walking around the halls at night was creepy enough in itself, but one experience I will never forget. I was the leader of a student/professor team that was in charge of evaluating lectures, professors, timetables, etc., and we usually had our meetings after hours. This one time, we were sat in what used to be the old employee cafeteria, according to one of the old professors, who had been around for a long time. Now, I had seen the original blueprints from back when it was an asylum, so I knew what buildings had been the women's cell wing, the men's wing, administration, including morgue, etc. A little while into the meeting, suddenly all of us, 8 people in total, turn at the same time, everybody hearing what seemed like a woman's scream coming from an open window towards the old women's wing. We all knew we were the only ones at the campus at the time, small part of a larger college, and we had all heard it, as evidenced by the fact that everyone turned their head. Now that was ducking creepy. Okay, here's my 2 stories. The first, I still don't know if there's a reasonable explanation for it. My mom tried suggesting a few back when it happened. But nope, it still makes no sense at all. Back in high school, me and my friend had a class that took place in a building situated outside the main school. The building had a fence surrounding it with a gate near the entrance of the classroom. The teacher was always supposed to let the whole class in through that gate. There was another gateway on the other side of the building, but we weren't supposed to enter through that. Anyway, me and my friend had a class there after lunch one day. We started walking to it a little early, and waited outside the gate. The bell went just as we arrived. By this time, at least half the class should have been there. My friend looked at her watch, exactly the time the class should be starting. Just a side note, absolutely no one was there. Not even other people in the distance, which was really weird even though classes had started by this time. We hung around for 15 minutes, then went to the secretary back at the main school. If I remember correctly, we had some important thing happening in the class that day, which we had to attend and complete in groups, and we were a bit panicky about missing it. Our obvious thought was that the place where class was taking place had changed and we forgot about it or didn't hear about it. However, the secretary got the teacher on the line and was annoyed. She let us know that the teacher had opened the gate 20 minutes ago and that we were idiots who had been at the wrong gate. No, we weren't. We went back, and found the gate open. The teacher laughed at us when we told her we had been at the correct gate at the right time. Apparently, The whole class had been where we had been at the time class had started. After class, I spoke to another friend. Coincidentally, she had been on the second story of the building as class was due to start. A window looks out below to the gate that leads to the class. She had seen the entire class going through the right gate at the right time, and she went down and went to class. We ended up checking with a lot of people because it sounded crazy. They had all been at the same place we had been at the same time. My friend's watch wasn't wrong or broken, we checked. They had been at the same gate. So, although this story doesn't have anything to do with ghosts or something like that, still freaks me out the most. About 10 years ago, I would have been in my early 20s, me and two of my friends decided one night to head down some train tracks and break into an old abandoned coal mine on the outskirts of town. My friend had been there a week before exploring with a buddy, and so we climbed through a hole in the fence they had cut. This place was pitch black and I had no experience with mining yards, so I could only imagine what these giant looming towers and silos were all around us. I could just barely make out these darker patches that were giant doors and holes in the structures and hear scuttling noises beyond. Those noises could easily be explained as pigeons or bats, so we were not too fazed. So we continued to our destination. We knew that our town was surrounded by old World War II forts and bunkers, and there was one on a hill in the middle of the mine yard. As we slowly crept towards our goal, I kept hearing a small tapping noise. Not too alarming, just a small tink 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 coming from the dark behind us in the direction we had come. We make it to the base of the hill that holds the bunker and find some way to sneak around the only pole light in the yard and up the hill. The whole time we hear the soft tink 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 behind us. Having made it up the hill and faced with the option to head into the bunker, us brave men decide to pass. Little too creepy for us with no lights to find our way in or out. Instead, we decided to head around back, and this is where things get interesting. We find ourselves standing around a hole with a ladder leading down into a lower level of the bunker with that relentless tink 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 coming from somewhere out in the shadows. Now on two sides of us are the steep drop off of the hill, on the other two sides are the walls of the bunker. We were boxed in on all sides with only a small path leading out and with the hole and ladder and ground at our feet. So we decide this is as good a place as any to light our joint, and so I break it out. With my back to the drop off of the hill a few feet behind me and the hole directly at my feet, I try. Well, I'm on top of a hill without much cover from the wind and having a difficult time getting the joint lit, and I'm growing frustrated. Not to mention that tink 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 is starting to get annoying. Up until this point I assumed it was a metal sign hanging on the fence we climbed through, gently blowing in the wind, and so ignored it. Frustrated with the joint and getting annoyed with the sound, I turned around and stared in its direction. I asked my friends what they thought it was and tried again to light the joint, but this time I was facing the noise and did not try to conceal the flame. As soon as the lighter flashed, the noise changed from a soft tink 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 into a thunderous boom boom boom. Oh shit, security guards, is the first thing that pops into my head. That booming noise is them running down metal stairs in one of these dark towers. They saw my face when the lighter's fire illuminated it and are now on the way. All three of us crouch halfway between flight and fight, unsure if we should run, hide, or do nothing. We decide to wait. It's too dark for them to find us easily, and they're so loud that we'll hear them the minute they get close. Boom boom boom, the noise just won't stop, and I swear it's getting louder. How long are those stairs, I think? This is weird. And I swear I hear movement in the grass in the darkness at the bottom of the hill. We all agreed it was probably just the wind in the grass, but decide it was time to sneak our way back out of this place. Slowly crouching through the dark, we move through the mining yard towards our exit when we run into a problem. Whatever is making that noise is in between us and the exit. We squat down the middle of an open gravel road to try to figure out our next move, safe in the thought it was just too dark for anybody to see us sitting there in the dirt. But just to be sure, we picked a spot that placed a large chain link fence between us and that god-awful boom 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 of the charging security guards. Now at this point I decided to upgrade the guards to cops in my mind and was becoming a bit antsy, but we decided to wait them out. I guess at this point we all realized that none of this is making any sense, and those guards or cops should have reached the bottom of those stairs by now. That's when things got weirder. With the boom 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 in front of us and nothing to do but wait if we want to use our only known exit, we start to hear something else. In the dark all around us, but somewhere close and on the same gravel we are crouching on. Things start to move. There was a thud noise and then a slow scraping noise as something was dragged across the gravel. Then again from somewhere else, quiet but very close. These noises were all around us, thuds, then a slow dragging across gravel, but we could not really pinpoint in what direction they were coming from. At this point I go from rational adult to scared kid, and I think of all the people who died at this mine, or what could be living in those tunnels. In my mind the noise went from guards/police, shot past ghosts, and now is smack dab in the middle of goblin and giant rat town. Of course we have to get the hell out of there and decide that climbing the fence behind the mine, running into the woods and making our way to the highway is our only option. And so we pick our butts up out of the dirt and sneak as fast as we can the hell out of there. We're making it, the noise are behind us and not getting any closer, and we find rows and rows of empty coal train cars. Perfect. We can walk freely between them with no chance of being spotted from a distance. With the end of the mine yard close by and with the protection of the train cars, we relax a bit and talk in less hushed whispers. I guess that was a mistake. A few seconds after entering the rows of train cars, the first car exploded in noise boom. Whatever was making that booming noise was right behind us, only feet away. I have never in my life, nor will I ever, I'm sure, move so swiftly again. The hundreds of feet between me and the fence to the outside world flew by, and I still do not understand how I got over the 10-foot fence so easily. I just remember leaping off it into the dark. We make it to the road and head back to town. The road bends around the mine and we can still hear that relentless boom, boom, boom of something smashing that train. My friends get too uncomfortable talking about it and seem happy to forget anything weird ever happened, but my curiosity drives me nuts, and I've gone back a few times over the years. Nothing out of the ordinary happened, and the last time I went by myself and everything was torn down and taken away.